hellhounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hellhounds, ghosts, demons are coming, spirits, ghosts.
Hello and welcome home, my little hellhounds, and welcome to another Killer Thursday. Tonight we have the Butcher of Plainfield and the Golden State Killer. So sit back and enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe. Edward Theodore Gein was born August 27th, 1906 and died July 26th, 1984, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield or the Plainfield Ghoul. He was an American convicted murderer and body snatcher. Gein's crimes, committed around his hometown of Plainfield, Wisconsin, gathered widespread notoriety in 1957 after authorities discovered he had exhumed corpses from local graveyards and fashioned trophies and keepsakes from their bones and skin. Gein also confessed to killing 2 women, tavern owner Mary Hogan in 1954 and hardware store owner Bernice Warden in 1957. Gein was initially found unfit to stand trial and confined to a mental health facility. By 1968, he was judged competent to stand trial. He was found guilty of the murder of Warden, but he was found legally insane and was remanded to a psychiatric institution. He died at Mendota Mental Health Institute of respiratory failure on July 26, 1984, aged 77. He is buried next to his family in the Plainfield Cemetery in a now unmarked grave. His early life, childhood. Ed Gein was born in LA Cross County, Wisconsin on August 27th, 1906, the second of 2 boys of George Philip Gein and Augusta Wilhelmine Gein. Gein had an elder brother, Henry George Gein. Augusta hated her husband, an alcoholic who was unable to keep a job. He had worked at various times as a carpenter, tanner, and insurance salesman. George owned a local grocery shop for a few years, but sold the business, and the family left the city to live in isolation on a 155-acre farm in the town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, which became the Gein family's permanent residence. Augusta took advantage of the farm's isolation by turning away outsiders who could have influenced her sons. Gein left the farm only to attend school. Outside of school, Gein spent most of his time doing chores on the farm. Augusta was fervently religious and nominally Lutheran. She preached to her boys about the innate immorality of the world, the evil of drinking, and her belief that all women, apart from herself, were naturally promiscuous and instruments of the devil. She reserved time every afternoon to read to them from the Bible, usually selecting verses from the Old Testament and the book of Revelation concerning death, murder, and divine retribution. Gein was shy, and classmates and teachers remembered him as having strange mannerisms, such as seemingly random laughter, as if he were laughing at his own personal jokes. To make matters worse, Augusta punished him whenever he tried to make friends. Despite his poor social development, Gein did fairly well in school, particularly in reading. Deaths in immediate family. On April 1st, 1940, Gein's father, George, died of heart failure caused by his alcoholism at aged 66. Henry and Ed began doing odd jobs around town to help cover living expenses. The brothers were generally considered reliable and honest by residents of the community. While both worked as handymen, Gein also frequently babysat for neighbours. He enjoyed babysitting, seeming to relate more easily to children than adults. Henry began dating a divorced mother of two and planned to move in with her. She worried about his brother's attachment to their mother and often spoke ill of her around Gein, who responded with shock and hurt. On May 16, 1944, Henry and Gein were burning away marsh vegetation on the property. The fire got out of control, drawing the attention of the local fire department. By the end of the day, the fire had been extinguished and the firefighters gone. Gein reported his brother missing. With lanterns and flashlights, a search party searched for Henry, whose body was found lying face down. Apparently he had been dead for some time, and it appeared that the cause of death was heart failure, since he had not been burned or injured otherwise. It was later reported by biographer Harold Sketcher that Henry had bruises on his head. Police dismissed the possibility of foul play, and the county coroner later officially listed asphyxiation as the cause of death. The authorities accepted the accident theory, but no official investigation was conducted, and an autopsy was not performed. Some later suspected, in retrospect, that Gein killed his brother. Questioning Gein about the death of Bernice Warden in 1957, state investigator Joe Wilimowski brought up questions about Henry's death. George W. Ardent, who studied the case, wrote that in retrospect it was possible and likely that Henry's death was the Cain and Abel aspect of the case. Gein and his mother were now alone. Augusta had a paralysing stroke shortly after Henry's death, and Gein devoted himself to taking care of her. Sometime in 1945, Gein later recounted he and his mother visited a man named Smith who lived nearby to purchase straw. According to Gein, Augusta witnessed Smith beating a dog. A woman inside the Smith home came outside and yelled for him to stop, but Smith beat the dog to death. Augusta was extremely upset by this scene. However, what bothered her did not appear to be the brutality toward the dog, but rather the presence of the woman. Augusta told Ed that the woman was not married to Smith, so she had no business being there. Smith's harlot, Augusta angrily called her. She had a second stroke soon after, and her health deteriorated rapidly. She died on December 29th, 1945, at the age of 67. Ed was devastated by her death. In the words of author Harold Sketcher, he had lost his only friend and one true love, and he was absolutely alone in the world. Work. Gein held on to the farm and earned money from odd jobs. He boarded up rooms used by his mother, including the upstairs, downstairs parlour and living room, leaving them untouched, while the rest of the house became increasingly squalid. These rooms remained pristine. Gein lived thereafter in a small room next to the kitchen. Around this time he became interested in reading pulp magazines and adventure stories, particularly those involving cannibals or Nazi atrocities. Gein was a handyman and received a farm subsidy from the federal government starting in 1951. He occasionally worked for the local municipal road crew and crop threshing crews in the area. Sometime between 1946 and 1956, he also sold an 80-acre parcel of land that his brother Henry had owned. Crimes. On the morning of November 16th, 1957, Plainfield hardware store owner Bernice Warden disappeared. A Plainfield resident reported that the hardware store's truck had been driven out from the rear of the building at around 9:30 a.m. The hardware store was closed the entire day. Some area residents believed this was because of deer hunting season. Bernice Warden's son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden, entered the store around 5 p.m. to find the store's cash register open and bloodstains on the floor. Frank Warden told investigators that Ed Gein had been in the store the evening before his mother's disappearance, and that he would return the next morning for a gallon of antifreeze. A sales slip for a gallon of antifreeze was the last receipt written by Warden on the morning she disappeared. On the evening of the same day, Gein was arrested at a West Plainfield grocery store, and the Washara County Sheriff's Department searched the Gein farm. A Warwickshire County Sheriff's deputy discovered Warden's decapitated body in a shed on Gein's property, hung upside down by her legs, with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes at her wrists. The torso was dressed out like a deer. She had been shot with a .22 caliber rifle, and the mutilations were made after her death. Searching the house, authorities found whole human bones and fragments, a waste basket made of human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on his bedposts, female skulls, some with the tops sawn off, bowls made from human skulls, a corset made from a female torso, skinned from shoulders to waist, leggings made from human leg skin, masks made from the skin of female heads, Mary Hogan's face mask in a paper bag, Mary Hogan's skull in a box, Bernice Warden's entire head in a burlap sack, Bernice Warden's heart in a plastic bag in front of Gein's pot-bellied stove, 9 vulva in a shoebox, a young girl's dress, and the vulvas of 2 females judged to have been about 15 years old, a belt made from female human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face, fingernails from female fingers. These artifacts were photographed at the State Crime Laboratory and then decently disposed of. When questioned, Gein told investigators that between 1947 and 1952 he made as many as 40 nocturnal visits to 3 local graveyards to exhume recently buried bodies while he was in a dazed-like state. On about 30 of those visits, he said he came out of the daze while in the cemetery, left the grave in good order and returned home empty-handed. On the other occasions, he dug up the graves of recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother and took the bodies home, where he tanned their skins to make his paraphernalia. Gein admitted to stealing from 9 graves from local cemeteries and led investigators to their locations. Alan Wilimowski of the State Crime Laboratory participated in opening 3 test graves identified by Gein. The caskets were inside wooden boxes. The top boards ran crossways, not lengthwise. The tops of the boxes were about 2 feet below the surface in sandy soil. Gein had robbed the graves soon after the funerals, while the graves were not completed. The test graves were exhumed because authorities were uncertain as to whether the slight Gein was capable of single-handedly digging up a grave during a single evening. They were found as Gein described. 2 of the exhumed graves were found empty. One had a crowbar in place of the body. 1 casket was empty. 1 casket Gein had failed to open when he lost his pry bar. and most of the body was gone from the third grave, yet Gein had returned rings and some body parts, thus apparently corroborating Gein's confession. Soon after his mother's death, Gein began to create a woman's suit so that he could become his mother, to literally crawl into her skin. Gein denied having sex with the bodies he exhumed, explaining they smelled too bad. During state crime laboratory interrogation, Gein also admitted to the shooting death of Mary Hogan, a tavern owner missing since 1954, whose head was found in his house, but he later denied memory of details of her death. A 16-year-old youth whose parents were friends of Gein and who attended ball games and movies with him reported that Gein kept shrunken heads in his house, which Gein had described as relics from the Philippines, sent by a cousin who had served on the islands during World War II. Upon investigation by the police, these were determined to be human facial skulls, carefully peeled from corpses and used by Gein as masks. Gein also considered a suspect in several other unsolved cases in Wisconsin, including the 1953 disappearance of Evelyn Hartley, a lacrosse babysitter. During questioning, Washura County Sheriff Art Schley reportedly assaulted Gein by banging his head and face into a brick wall. As a result, Gein's initial confession was ruled inadmissible. Schley died of heart failure at age 43 in 1968, before Gein's trial. Many who knew Schley said he was traumatized by the horror of Gein's crimes, and this, along with the fear of having to testify, especially about assaulting Gein, caused his death. One of his friends said he was a victim of Ed Gein, as surely as if he had butchered him. Trial. On November 21st, 1957, Gein was arraigned on one count of first-degree murder of Washura County Court, where he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found mentally incompetent, thus unfit for trial. He was sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane, now the Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security facility in Waupun, Wisconsin, and later transferred to the Mendota State Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. In 1968, doctors determined Gein was mentally able to confer with counsel and participate in his defense. The trial began on November 7th, 1968, and lasted 1 week. A psychiatrist testified that Gein had told him that he did not know whether the killing of Bernice Worden was intentional or accident. Gein had told him that while he examined a gun in Worden's store, the gun went off, killing Worden. Gein testified that after trying to load a bullet into the rifle, it discharged. He said he had not aimed the rifle at Worden and did not remember anything else that happened that morning. At the request of the defence, Gein's trial was held without jury, with Judge Robert H. Goldmar presiding. Gein was found guilty by Goldmar on November 14th. A second trial dealt with Gein's sanity after testimony by doctors for the prosecution and defence. Goldmar ruled Gein not guilty by reason of insanity and ordered him committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. Gein spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. Judge Goldmar wrote, due to prohibitive costs, Gein was tried for only one murder, that of Mrs. Warden. He also admitted to killing Mary Hogan. Fate of Ed Gein's property. Ed Gein's house and 195-acre property were appraised at $4,700, equivalent to $42,000 in 2019. His possessions were scheduled to be auctioned on March 30th, 1958, amidst rumours that the house and the land it stood on might become a tourist attraction. Early on the morning of March 20th, the house was destroyed by fire. The deputy fire marshal reported that a garbage fire had been set 75 feet from the house by a cleaning crew who were given the task of disposing of refuse. Further, that hot coals were recovered from the spot of the bonfire, and the fire from the bonfire's location did not travel along the ground to the house. Arson was suspected, but the cause of the fire was never officially determined. When Gein learned of the incident while in detention, he shrugged and said, "Just as well." Gein's 1949 Ford sedan, which he used to haul the bodies of his victims, was sold at public auction for $760, equivalent to $6,700 in 2009. To Carnival Sideshow operator Bunny Gibbons. Gibbons charged carnival goers 25 cents admission fee to see it. Gein's death. Gein died at the Mendota Mental Health Institute due to respiratory failure secondary to lung cancer on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77. Over the years, souvenir seekers chipped pieces from his gravestone at the Plainfield Cemetery until the stone itself was stolen in 2000. It was recovered in June 2001 near Seattle and was placed in storage at the Washoe County Sheriff's Department. The gravesite itself is now unmarked, but not unknown. Gein is interred between his parents and brother in the cemetery. Now, let's look at the Golden State Killer. Joseph James D'Angelo Jr., born November 8, 1945, is an American serial killer, serial rapist, burglar, and former police officer who committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and 120 burglaries across California between 1973 and 1986. D'Angelo was responsible for at least 3 crime sprees throughout California, each of which spawned a different nickname in the press. before it became evident that they were committed by the same offender. In the San Joaquin Valley, he was known as the Visalia Ransacker before moving to the Sacramento area, where he became known as the East Area Rapist and was linked by modus operandi to additional attacks in Contra Costa County, Stockton, and Modesto. D'Angelo committed serial murders in Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties, where he was known as the Night Stalker, and later the original Night Stalker. Due to serial killer Richard Ramirez also being called the Night Stalker, D'Angelo is believed to have taunted and threatened both victims and police in obscene phone calls and possibly written communications. During the decades-long investigation, several suspects were cleared through DNA evidence, alibi, or other investigation methods. In 2001, after DNA testing indicated that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person, the acronym ERONS came into use. The case was a factor in the establishment of California's DNA database, which collects DNA from all accused and convicted felons in California, and has been called second only to Virginia's ineffectiveness in solving cold cases. To heighten awareness of the case, crime writer Michelle McNamara coined the name Golden State Killer in early 2013. The FBI and local law enforcement agencies held a news conference on June 15, 2016 to announce a renewed nationwide effort, offering a $50,000 reward for his capture. On April 24, 2018, authorities charged 72-year-old D'Angelo with 8 counts of first-degree murder based upon DNA evidence. Investigators had identified members of D'Angelo's family through forensic genetic genealogy. This was also the first announcement connecting the Visalia Ransacker crimes to D'Angelo. Owing to California's statute of limitations on pre-2017 rape cases, D'Angelo could not be charged with the 1970s rapes, but he was charged in August 2018 with 13 related kidnapping and abduction attempts. On June 29, 2020, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder and kidnapping as part of a plea bargain that spared him the death penalty. D'Angelo also admitted to numerous crimes with which he had not been formally charged, including rapes. On August 21, 2020, D'Angelo was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His early life and career. Joseph James D'Angelo was born on November 8, 1945 in Bath, New York, to Joseph James D'Angelo Sr., a sergeant in the United States Army, and Kathleen Lewis DeGrout. He has 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. A relative reported that when D'Angelo was a young child, he witnessed his 7-year-old sister's rape by 2 airmen in the warehouse in West Germany, where the family was stationed at the time. Following his conviction, one of D'Angelo's sisters claimed that he was abused by their father while he was growing up. Between 1959 and 1960, D'Angelo attended Mills Junior High School in Rocho, Cordova, California. Beginning in 1961, he attended Folsom High School, from which he received a GED certificate in 1964. He played on the school's junior varsity baseball team. Prosecutors reported that D'Angelo committed burglaries and tortured and killed animals during his teenage years. D'Angelo joined the United States Navy in 1964 and served for 22 months during the Vietnam War as a damage controlman on the cruiser USS Canberra and the destroyer tender USS Piedmont. Beginning in August 1968, D'Angelo attended Sierra College in Rocklin, California. He graduated with an associate degree in police science with honors. He attended Sacramento State University in 1971, where he earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. D'Angelo later took postgraduate courses and further police training at the College of the Sequoias in Visalia, then completed a 32-week police internship at the Roseville Police Department. From May 1973 to August 1976, he was a burglary unit police officer in Exeter, a town of about 5,000 people near Visalia. Having relocated from Citrus Heights, he then served in Auburn from August 1976 to July 1979, when he was arrested for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. He was sentenced to 6 months probation and fired that October. During the process of being fired from the city, D'Angelo threatened to kill the chief of police and allegedly stalked the chief's house. In May 1970, D'Angelo became engaged to Bonnie Jean Cowell, a classmate at Sierra College, but she broke off the relationship after D'Angelo threatened her with a gun in order to force her to marry him. In November 1973, he married Sharon Marie Huddle in Placer, known as Loomis. In 1980, they purchased a house in Citrus Heights, where he was eventually arrested. Huddle became an attorney in 1982, and they had 3 daughters. 2 were born in Sacramento, and 1 was born in Los Angeles, before the couple separated in 1991. In July 2008, Huddle filed for a divorce. They were divorced in 2019. D'Angelo's employment history in the 1980s is unknown. From 1990, his retirement in 2017, he worked as a truck mechanic at a Save Mart Supermarkets distribution centre in Roseville. He was arrested in 1996 over an incident at a gas station, but the charge was dismissed. His brother-in-law said that D'Angelo casually brought up the East Area rapist in conversation. Around the time of the original crimes, Neighbours reported that D'Angelo frequently engaged in loud, profane outbursts. One neighbour reported that his family received a phone message from D'Angelo threatening to deliver a load of death because of their barking dog. He was living with a daughter and granddaughter at the time of his arrest. His crimes. DNA evidence linked D'Angelo to 8 murders in Goleta, Ventura, Dana Point and Irvine. 2 other murders in Goleta, lacking DNA evidence, were linked by modus operandi. He pleaded guilty to 3 other murders, 2 in Rancho Cordova and 1 in Visalia. D'Angelo also committed more than 50 known rapes in the California counties of Sacramento, Contra Costa, Stanislaus, San Joaquin, Alameda, Santa Clara, and Yolo, and he was linked to hundreds of incidents of burglaries, theft, vandalism, peeping, stalking, and prowling. Visalia Ransacker, 1973 to 1976. It was long suspected that the training ground of the criminal who became the East Area rapist was Visalia, California, although earlier Visalia crimes dating back as early as May 1973 and other sprees like that of the Cordova cat burglar, as well as burglaries that took place after the McGowan shooting, and now suspected to be linked as well. Over a period of 20 months, D'Angelo is believed to have been responsible for 1 murder and around 120 burglaries. Most of the ransacker's activities involved breaking into houses, going through or vandalizing the owner's possessions, scattering women's underclothing, and stealing coins and low value or personal items, while often ignoring banknotes and other valuable items in plain sight. In late April 2018, the Visalia Chief of Police stated that while there was no DNA linking D'Angelo to the Central Valley cases, his department had other evidence that played a role in the investigation, and he was confident that the Visalia ransacker has been captured. Though the statute of limitations for the burglaries have each expired, D'Angelo was formally charged on August 13, 2018 with the first-degree murder of Claude Snelling in 1975. In 2020, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to the murder of Claude Snelling, confirming that he was the Visalia ransacker. His burglaries. The first recorded ransacking was on March 19, 1974, when a sum of $50 in coins was stolen from a piggy bank. Most of the ransacker's activities involved breaking into houses, rifling through or vandalizing the owner's possessions, scattering women's underclothes, and stealing a range of low-value items, while often ignoring banknotes and higher-valued items in plain sight. The ransacker would also often arrange or display items in the house. Items emptied included piggy banks and coin jars, and stolen items often included blue chip stamps, foreign or historic coins, and personal items, such as a single earring, cufflinks, rings, or medallions, but also included 6 weapons and various types of ammunition. Multiple same-day ransackings were common as well, including 12 separate incidents on November 30th, 1974. Common MOs of the burglaries included scaling fences and moving through established routes such as parks, walkways, ditches and trails, attempting to pry open multiple points of entry, particularly windows, leaving multiple points of escape open, especially windows, as well as the house garage and garden doors, moving removed window screens onto beds or into bedrooms, placing warning items such as dishes or bottles against the doors and on door handles, wearing gloves given the absence of fingerprint evidence. Shootings. On September 11th, 1975, D'Angelo broke into the home of Claude Snelling, 45, at 532 Whitney Lane. Snelling, a journalism professor at the College of Sequoias, had previously chased a prowler discovered under his daughter's window around 10 p.m. on February 5th, 1975. On September 11th, he was awakened around 2 a.m. by strange noises. Upon leaving his bedroom, Snelling shouted and ran through the open back door and confronted a ski-masked intruder in his carport, attempting to kidnap his daughter, who had been subdued with threats of being stabbed or shot. Snelling was then shot twice, staggered back into the house to his wife, and later died. After the shooting, the assailant fled the scene, leaving behind a stolen bicycle at 615 Redwood Street. After the murder, Beth Snelling, 16, a cheerleader at Mount Whitney High School, underwent hypnosis in order to gather further details. The Visalia Police Department also committed more resources to apprehending the ransacker, and a $4,000 reward, equivalent to $19,264 in 2020, was posted. Nighttime stakeouts were set up near houses that he had previously prowled, but the ransackings continued. Around 8:30 p.m. on December 12, 1975, a masked man entered the backyard of a house at 1505 W. Kiwa Avenue, near where the ransacker had been reported to frequent. When Detective William McGowan, on stakeout inside the garage, attempted to detain the man, the suspect shrieked, removed his mask, and feigned surrender. After McGowan fired a warning shot, however, after jumping the fence to the house, 1501, he also pulled out a revolver with his left hand and fired once near McGowan's face, shattering his flashlight. Nearby officers rushed to aid McGowan, and the shooter was able to escape. Items collected as evidence included the flashlight, tennis shoe tracks, and dropped loot, blue chip stamps, and a blue sock full of coins. The East Area Rapist, 1976 to 1979. D'Angelo moved to the Sacramento area in 1976, where his crimes escalated from burglary to rape. The crimes initially centered on the then unincorporated areas of Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Rancho Cordova, east of Sacramento. His initial modus operandi was to stalk middle-class neighborhoods at night in search of women who were alone in one-story homes, usually near a school, creek, trail, or other open space that would provide a quick escape. He was seen a number of times, but always successfully fled. On one occasion, he shot and seriously wounded a young pursuer. Most victims had seen or heard a prowler on their property before attacks, and many had experienced break-ins. Police believed that the offender would conduct extensive reconnaissance in a targeted neighborhood, looking into windows and prowling in yards before selecting a home to attack. It was believed that he sometimes entered the homes of future victims to unlock windows, unload guns, and plant ligatures for later use. He frequently telephoned future victims, sometimes for months in advance, to learn their daily routines. Although he originally targeted women alone in their homes or with children, D'Angelo eventually preferred attacking couples. His usual method was to break in through a window or sliding glass door and awaken the sleeping occupants with a flashlight, threatening them with a handgun. Victims were subsequently bound with ligatures, often shoelaces, that he found or brought with him, then blindfolded and gagged with towels that he had ripped into strips. The female victim was usually forced to tie up her male companion before she was bound. The bindings were often so tight that the victim's hands were numb for hours after being untied. He separated the couple, often stacking dishes on the male's back and threatening to kill everyone in the house if he heard them rattle. He moved the woman to the living room and often raped her repeatedly, sometimes for several hours. D'Angelo sometimes spent hours in the home ransacking closets and drawers, eating food in the kitchen, drinking beer, raping the women again, or making additional threats. Victims sometimes thought he had left the house before he jumped from the darkness. He typically stole items, often personal objects and items of little value, but occasionally cash and firearms. He then crept away, leaving victims uncertain if he had left. He was believed to escape on foot through a series of yards and then use a bicycle to go home or to a car, making extensive use of parks, schoolyards, creek beds, and other open spaces that kept him off the street. The rapist operated in Sacramento County from the first attacks in June 1976 until May 1977. After a 3-month gap, he struck in a nearby San Joaquin County in September before returning to Sacramento. For all but one of the next 10 attacks, the rapist attacked 5 times during the summer of 1978 in Stanislaus and Yolo counties, before disappearing again for 3 months. Attacks then moved primarily to Contra Costa County in October and lasted until July 1979. His murders. Young Sacramento couple Brian McGorry, a military policeman at Mather Air Force Base, and his wife Katie McGorry were walking their dog in the Rancho Cordova area on the night of February 2nd, 1978, near where 5 East Area rapist attacks had occurred. The McGorrys fled after a confrontation in the street, but were chased down and shot to death. Some investigators suspected that they had been murdered by the East Area rapist because of their proximity to the other attacks locations, and a shoelace was found nearby. The FBI announced on June 15th, 2016 that it was confident that the East Area rapist had murdered the McGorrys. On June 29th, 2020, D'Angelo entered a plea of guilty to these murders. Original Night Stalker, 1979 to 1986. Shortly after the rape committed on July 5th, 1979, D'Angelo moved to Southern California and began killing his victims, first striking in Santa Barbara County in October. The attacks lasted until 1981, with a lone attack in 1986. Only the couple in the first attack survived, alerting neighbours and forcing the intruder to flee. The other victims were murdered by gunshot or bludgeoning. Since D'Angelo was not linked to these crimes for decades, he was known as the Night Stalker in the area before being renamed the Original Night Stalker after the serial killer Richard Ramirez received the former nickname. 1979, on October 1st, an intruder broke in and tied up a Goleta couple. Alarmed by hearing him say, "I'll kill 'em," to himself, the man and woman tried to escape when he left the room, and the woman screamed, realizing that the alarm had been raised. The intruder fled on bicycle. A neighbour, an FBI agent, responded to the noise and pursued the perpetrator, who abandoned the bicycle and a knife and fled on foot through local backyards. The attack was later linked to the Offerman Manning murders by shoe prints and twine used to bind the victims. On December 30th, 44-year-old Robert Offerman and 35-year-old Deborah Alexandra Manning were found shot to death at Offerman's condominium on Avenida Pequena in Goleta. Offerman's bindings were untied, indicating that he had lunged at the attacker. Neighbours had heard gunshots. Paw prints of a large dog were found at the scene, leading to a speculation that the killer may have brought one with him. The killer also broke into the vacant adjoining residence and stole a bicycle, later found abandoned on a street north of the scene, from a third residence in the complex. 1980. On March 13th, 33-year-old Charlene Smith and 43-year-old Lyman Smith were found murdered in their Ventura home. Charlene Smith had been raped. A log from a woodpile on the side of the house was used to bludgeon the victims to death. Their wrists and ankles had been bound with drapery cord. An unusual Chinese knot, a diamond knot, was used on Charlene's wrists. The same knot was noted in the Sacramento East Area Rapist attack, at least one confirmed case of which was publicly known. The murder was, therefore, briefly given the name the Diamond Knot Killer. On August 19th, 24-year-old Keith Eli Harrington and 27-year-old Patrice Briscoe Harrington were found bludgeoned to death in their home on Cockleshell Drive in Dana Point's Nigel Shores gated community. Patrice Harrington had also been raped, although there was evidence that the Harringtons' wrists and ankles were bound. No murder weapon or ligatures were found at the scene. The Harringtons had been married for 3 months at the time of their death. Patrice was a nurse in Irvine, and Keith was a medical student at UC Irvine. Keith's brother Bruce later spent nearly $2 million supporting California Proposition 69, authorizing DNA collection from all California felons and certain other criminals. 1981. On February 6th, 28-year-old Manuela Withon was raped and murdered in her Irvine home. Although Withon's body had signs of being tied before she was bludgeoned, no murder weapon or ligatures were found. Though the victim was married, her husband was away, hospitalized, and she was alone at the time of the attack. Withon's television was found in the backyard, possibly the killer's attempt to make the crime appear to be a botched robbery. On July 27th, 35-year-old Sherry Domingo and 27-year-old Gregory Sanchez became the original Night Stalker's 10th and 11th murder victims. Both were attacked in Domingo's residence on Toltec Way in Goleta, several blocks south of Robert Offerman's condominium, where she was living temporarily. It was owned by a relative and up for sale. The offender entered the house through a small bedroom window. Sanchez had not been tied and was shot and wounded in the cheek before he was bludgeoned to death with a garden tool. Some believe that Sanchez may have realized he was dealing with the man responsible for the Offerman Manning murders and tried to tackle the killer rather than be tied up. Again, no neighbours responded to the gunshot. Sanchez's head was covered with clothes pulled from the closet. Domingo was raped and bludgeoned. Bruises on her wrists and ankles indicated that she had been tied. Although the restraints were missing, a piece of shipping twine was found near the bed, and fibres from an unknown source were scattered over the body. Authorities believed that the attacker may have worked as a painter or in a similar job at the Calais Real shopping centre. 1986. On May 4th, 18-year-old Janelle Lisa Cruz was found after she was raped and bludgeoned to death in her Irvine home. Her family was on vacation in Mexico at the time of the attack. A pipe wrench, reported missing by Cruz's stepfather, was thought to be the murder weapon. Initially, investigators in respective jurisdictions did not think the Southern California murders were connected. A Sacramento detective strongly believed that the East Area rapist was responsible for the Goleta attacks, but the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department attributed them to a local career criminal who was later murdered. Unaware of the Goleta murders, local police in surrounding jurisdictions followed false leads related to men who were close to the female victims. One person, later cleared, was charged with 2 of the murders. Many years later, the cases were linked almost entirely by DNA testing. Well, my little hellhounds, that's it for tonight. If you want more true crime stories like these, then please leave a comment down below and hit the like button and subscribe. If you have any stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.